in 15 minutes here on ABC Radio Canberra. But enough of sport for now. Time to look at the arts instead with Jarrod Walker and Walker's Watch of the Week. Hello, Jarrod.
Hello, Anna. Welcome back.
I'm delighted to be back. I'm delighted to be talking about popular culture and film and television with you once again.
It's good to chat geekily.
It is, exactly. It has been too long. And we have some interesting shows to talk about, actually, this week. I want to start with a bit of a sound of this one, which has actually been filmed in Australia. This is Preacher.
Your boss kidnapped our friend. He wants to help us get him out.
My great design is at work. And it's going to be beautiful.
Things are going to get ugly. Possibly deadly.
I have the greatest power in the universe. Go and save the world.
It's been late for that.
We all gotta die sometime.
Corky! Kindly wrap up the hysterics and make your point.
Yes, that was a very broad crikey right near the end there, possibly suggesting this is a slightly well, I don't even know the word I'd use, Jarrod. Tell us about Preacher?
Well, Preacher is it is really, really weird, and I do remember
That's exactly the word I was reaching for.
And I love that, but I do remember once seeing executive producer and writer producer of the show, Seth Rogen, that on a chat show trying to explain the plot and just doing that Seth Rogen all the way through it because it just sounds insane. But essentially, season one introduced this character, Jesse Custer, played by Dominic Cooper, who most people would know from Mamma Mia and many other films as well. But he's a hard-drinking, chain-smoking preacher who has a crisis of faith and is imbued with the power of the voice of God, which essentially means he can command people to do what he wants. He will tell someone, stay here, and that person is immobile, cannot move, and will be on that spot forever unless he tells them to move. So he can command anyone to do whatever he wants. So in season one, he sets out on a quest of sorts because the big mystery is where is God? Because God is missing from heaven, which is a location in this story.
Okay.
So is hell. Hitler is a character played by Noah Taylor. He's in hell, of course.
Australia's own Noah Taylor.
Australia's own Noah Taylor, but it's a very strange setup. And essentially, there's Jessie, there's Tulip, played by Ruth Negga, who is an Irish actress. She's fantastic in that role, and she's a kind of gun crazy, punch first, ask questions later sort of person, and she is Jessie's ex-girlfriend. And Jessie's friend Cassidy, played by Irish actor Joseph Gilgan, who also happens to be a vampire and is immortal and can regenerate. So coming along with that is this kind of bizarre sort of covert Vatican type corporation that's seeking to find and install a cloned Messiah, cloned from the blood of Christ. And that is the most bizarre idea, this sort of, it's almost like the Catholic Church, although they are deeply involved with the Catholic Church, but also all churches. And they sort of have nefarious goals as well that Jesse kind of gets in the way of. And because he has literally the voice of God, the power of God, they're after him as well in season 4. And because they want that power for themselves.
Jarrod, this does, I have to say, sound weird.
It is weird. It's based on a comic by Garth Ennis. Garth Ennis also created the graphic novel The Boys, which I reviewed quite recently. And if anyone out there wants to check out The Boys, you can on Amazon. You should, because you can sort out your priorities. Come on, get on it. But it's got a freewheeling, surreal, bizarre sense of humor. The violence is extreme. It is extreme. It's quite over the top.
Are we talking like Sin City Tarantino extreme?
We're talking, it would sort of make that pale, basically.
Right,
but it's so comic book, literally and figuratively, and it's so silly and weird. It's got a core group of fans, and it's got a bit of a following, which is why AMC in the US have kept renewing it, essentially, because they do get fairly solid viewing figures, but they're not massive, which is why it's ending at the end of this season. And this season shot in Melbourne and Victoria regionally. They've set stuff in Jordan, and it's regional Victoria, so they've got a lot of desert sort of fakery that they're kind of using. But then at a certain point in the show, which is up to episode 3 at the moment on Stan, it's gone to Australia. as
Hence
a location.
the crikey in the trailer.
Hence the crikey. So you do have Aussie actors like David Field. You'll see Aussie actors popping. Alex Paps was in the episode I watched last night. So it's quite nice to see Aussie actors sort of being in there in the mix. It is so wonderfully surreal. It's fun, but it did slightly upset a few people in the States with religious sensibilities, shall we say?
Well, yes, clearly adopting some religious
Yes.
iconography for ways which would be controversial.
Yes,
I think
it's
fair to
having
say.
a bit of crazy, silly fun with it, and it is what it is, I
If
guess.
you are someone who is okay with very extreme, if sort of cartoonesque violence, or I should say graphic novel-esque violence, probably more than cartoonesque. If you are okay with if you're someone who's okay with that sort of stuff, is this a good show?
It is a great show. It's a lot of fun. It's very inventive and ingenious in the plotting. I do find that just episode after episode, you are laughing at just how crazy the show is and where it does go. But it does have these three core characters that are really engaging. They're really fun to go with, and you do care about them, and that's what keeps you watching the show. But it just has such a strange and surreal setting. But that's part of the appeal. It does diverge from what the comic was, which a lot of fans were annoyed by, but I just went with it, and I love it. It's great fun. Season 4 is in play at the moment on Stan.
So Jarrod Walker with us for Walker's Watch of the Week. Also talking about, I've just given away my nice segue. See, I was going to have a nice segue, but I've spoiled it because Mindhunter is the second thing that we're talking about this week, which is much less weird than Preacher,
Yes.
but probably equally dark.
Well, it is dark, but it's quite straightforward. Essentially, it's a history, or well, not a history. It's kind of the creation of FBI profiling, serial killer profiling, which is, I find, quite fascinating. It's not a show. Yeah, it's dark subject matter, but it's not concerned with a depiction of the violent events. It's always about aftermath. It's always about, okay, a crime has happened. We're going to find out what occurred, and we're going to look at the evidence. It's a procedural, so it's got that CSI element. But because it's made by David Fincher, who most people would know from Benjamin Button or Fight Club or Alien 3, if you want to go way back to his roots. But essentially, his eye. He also, I believe, directed the first episode of House of Cards. So he has a very classic steely gaze when it comes to the way his stuff is shot. He's a notorious auteur, has a very picky style in terms of getting it right. So Mindhunter is stunningly detailed in its period, the way they recreate periods. Like, I was blown away by the street scenes, and you just think, how on earth did they recreate all these streets, all these different locations? Because it is very much a road movie, an old road show. The two characters are these two FBI investigators, Holden Ford, played by Jonathan Groff, who I was told was in
His
Glee.
name is Holden Ford.
His name is Holden Ford.
Sorry,
and he's
I bumped on that for a moment there.
He's an analogue for a real-life profiler named John Douglas, who is actually quite famous and has published quite a few books on FBI profiling, because he essentially invented it. Because back then, investigators just saw a crime, they solved it, they did not really care who or what was the mindset of the person that committed the crime. That did not interest them, and they didn't see any point in trying to evaluate that or assess that, so that you could try and connect the dots on a pattern. And this was the first time that was done. So the first series did actually have actors portraying real-life killers that they interview in order to sort of gain data and to collect it. And this series has Charles Manson, I believe, features in it, and the son of Sam killer David Berkowitz. And actually, as a side note, Charles Manson, portrayed by Australia's own Damon Herriman, who plays him in Quentin Tarantino's film Once Upon a Time in Hollywood. So he got to play Manson twice in different films or different shows, but at different times in that character's life. So, which is pretty odd, but apparently it was a bit of a roller coaster ride of an experience for him.
I bet it was.
But essentially, those two characters, Holden Ford, played by Jonathan Groff, who I believe was in Glee, I was told. I've not actually seen Glee, and Bill Tench, played by Holt McElhaney, and with the help of Wendy Carr, who's a doctor, a professor, and she's played by Anna Torv, who is in
Australia's Own and Secret Cities, yes.
And it was also one of my favourite shows, Fringe.
Yes.
Which I actually really enjoyed. If you haven't seen Fringe, I highly recommend you check it out. Anyway, of course, so basically in the second season, they're in Atlanta and they're investigating these infamous child murders that upended that city in the late 70s, early 80s. There was, I believe, about 28 or 29 children that were killed. And so it's probably, like I said, it's dark subject matter, but this is not a show that's about the gore or about the violence. It's more about psychology and the fascination that we have with these kinds of killers, and how this actual process, or what's now quite standard, how that actually got started.
Yeah.
And it's so well made, and it so draws you in. It's fascinating. It's a really great show.
Speaking of weird a little bit earlier, Jarrod Walker, and just quickly, let's have a taste of your this one, because I think weird is probably one of the words I would also use.
I saw something. A vision.
You read too many stories.
No, this was real.
Everything the Skeksis ever told us was a lie. And now everyone and everything is at risk.
What you can't see there are the quite Jim Henson, well, the literally Jim Henson-esque puppets saying those lines.
Yes, that's right.
That's Dark Crystal.
We should set some context for that. Essentially, it's coming on Netflix at the end of this month. There is a review embargo. I have seen some of this new Dark Crystal Age of Resistance, it's called. If anyone out there remembers the Dark Crystal when you were a kid back in 1982, Jim Henson's, he of The Muppets and Sesame Street, Jim Henson had a passion project, and essentially it's straight fantasy. It is dramatic, it's very dark, it's aimed at a broad audience, but it has scary moments, and Jim Henson really saw a kind of Lord of the Rings with puppets, and that's essentially what you can expect with this. There is a trailer out, which that audio was from. Essentially, now it's been brought back and revived by Netflix, and it has Lisa Henson on board, so there's a family connection, and a lot of the creatives that were involved in the original, Brian Froud is another one who helped design it, and these key creators from the original are involved in this new version. It's episodes, I believe it's about 10 episodes. Louis Leterrier is the director. Now, he made Incredible Hulk, Clash of the Titans, Wrath of the Titans. So he's an action filmmaker, but he and you could see in by the trailer, and he does, all I can say is because there is a review embargo, but I can't tell you one way or the other, but the fact I'm talking about it should say what you should probably do in terms of whether or not you'll check it out. But it's in the vein of Lord of the Rings or Game of Thrones, but it's aimed at a broad family audience, maybe not for the younger kids, because there are scary bits, I suppose. But Epic Vistas, it's massive world building. It's so overwhelmingly intricate, and it does draw you in quite amazingly well. And
definitely,
I was very impressed.
Definitely something for the fantasy nerds to enjoy. Jarrod Walker,
Yes.
as always, you leave us with heaps to think about. Thank you.
Excellent. Thank you very much.
Thank you.